I think it really boils down to a person's capacity to tolerate discomfort. And that's something that we really try to feel out in the interview process and talk about difficult experiences in their lives, or when they've confronted a friend, or how do you talk to people if you have different viewpoints.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults, and we also talk about being thriving adults ourselves. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. Here on the podcast, I share my experiences parenting 5 now adult kids and working with thousands more as a summer camp director for the past 4 decades. I'm the author of Happy Campers, and I love sharing encouragement and ideas for living more positive, connected lives. Topics I researched extensively for my master's in psychology and continue to explore today. I created this podcast as a place to share what I've learned and to encourage us all to raise and be thriving adults. Hey, Sunshine Parenting listeners, welcome to this episode. I'm here with Andy and Alison Moeshberger. They are summer camp directors who I've actually known since their 20s, but they are not in their 20s anymore. But the reason I'm having them on the podcast this week is because in their role as summer camp directors, they interview, hire, train, and work with literally hundreds of people in their 20s every single summer. And so they have a really good perspective on what kinds of traits and skills and things you can be thinking about as a young adult that will help you be successful pretty much in any job, regardless of where you decide to work. And I think I would like to just give them a moment first to give a brief plug to working at something like summer camp for at least a few summers or a summer during your early 20s, late teens, kind of college years. So why don't you first talk to that, and then we'll talk more about what are the things that you're looking for and that we see during the summer in this group.
Yeah. I think, and listen, it's not hard to find a lot of articles from summer camps saying, come work at a camp. It's better than having an internship, because it is. I think one of the things it does for young people especially is it gives them an opportunity where they have responsibility, where they have decision-making, where most likely if they stick with it for a year or two, they're going to get some leadership possibilities. And in camp, all of those things are accelerated versus in kind of a more traditional, like 30-year career style job. Because, like you said, we employ literally hundreds of 20-year-olds. Like our upper management, like everything below the directors, are probably people in their 20s. And when you come to work in an environment like that, you're going to get more opportunities to learn by doing. And camps, generally speaking, good camps especially, have a very rapid feedback system for employees. And so as a 20-year-old, you're going to get a lot of feedback. Like you go to work, like my first teaching job, I got 3 evaluations a year. Like I was 22 and I got told how I was doing. And honestly, they weren't all that effective. Whereas I know if you come to work for us, if you work for 4 sessions, you're going to have at least 4 evals. They're going to happen every other week. They're going to be with somebody who is probably like 2 years older than you. And so they know what's going on. So I think compared to an internship where it's going to be really task driven, counseling and working at a summer camp is very much more soft skills and leadership driven, not so much task oriented. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly for our camp, and really I would say it's fairly ubiquitous, we talk about the campers being the most important people at camp. And then we also talk about how we all work to give them a great experience. The people on the front lines are the counselors. That makes them the next most important people at camp. You're not going to find an internship or other job opportunity where you truly have that much influence over the experience of the other people at your job. And I think as a benefit as well, living at camp and working at camp with the same people, your peers become very close friends. Much like living in a dorm when you first move to college, it opens your eyes to a new way of just interacting with your friends. And I think for us, especially, the fact that that's primarily done face to face and not over screens just makes those relationships form so quickly and amplifies the depth and just makes it really truly lifelong friends that you can meet at camp because you're doing the same thing day in and day out with those people and really experiencing life together. And certainly for me, I can't think of anything in my life outside of college where I felt that.
Okay, well, that was a great sales pitch. I really do encourage you. No, seriously. No, that was great because we're constantly beating this drum, but it really, truly is for young adults such a fabulous experience. And it's life-changing in terms of relationally and skill building. And side note, I keep mentioning the book, The Defining Decade by Meg Jay during this series, but she actually, one of her biggest kind of 20s experience was working at Outward Bound.
Yep.
And it started being like a delivery person and then doing some other things. And then when she was applying for whatever her PhDs, I think in psychology or counseling or something, she didn't have, like an internship in counseling, but her conversations with the interviewers at these are hard programs to get into. When she mentioned her experience at Outward Bound, that was what the connection was. And so we've heard that from our employees too, where they work at camp instead of doing the engineering internship. And then in interviewing for the engineering job, they have the skills because they have the degree. They now also have this interpersonal skills, even like Alison mentioned, some management skills, or I think you mentioned just you can kind of, if you stay at camp or Outward Bound for several years, you end up gaining more responsibilities and some experiences that you will not get for many more years in a traditional career. Okay. So that being said, we are a group that really, really love this generation of workers in their 20s. These young adults are fabulous. We think there's many, I think they're getting a kind of a bad rap in some areas because of some differences generationally, but we're not going to get into those details. That's a different topic. But we have some really, truly fabulous young adults who have come through our program. So I would like you to talk about what are the traits or skills that you see in these young adults that really make them stand out as employees, as teammates at camp and really anywhere. But we're talking about camp today.
I think the big one for me, things our best 20s employees are doing is that they're coachable, that they're willing to listen to feedback. And we talk a lot about this in training. I don't know that it comes naturally, but to say, okay, this isn't a personal attack. This is somebody who wants me to get better and I can then move and get better. And you don't need any special skills to do that other than putting your pride kind of in the back and saying, okay, I'm not perfect, which is hard for some of us maybe to say, but that I can take this feedback and I can improve. And I say in interviews with 20-year-olds all the time, I don't care if you can teach water skiing. That doesn't really matter to me. If you have a personality that fits with what we're doing at camp and you're willing to learn, we can teach you that. I can't teach personality. So if you're willing to learn and willing to work hard and willing to take feedback, I think you're going to be successful. And anybody can do those things.
Well, and I think actually, as you were talking, I was thinking about how if you've just been in school and kind of living the normal life up till this point, everything has been so grade related that you can get really fixated on I want to get a good grade or a good score. And so I think that that's where you have to kind of get this shift in attitude that it's no longer a competition to get a higher grade. It's, hey, we're all learning here. And how can I be receptive to that? And it's so true. The people I put in my book, the question, what else can I do?
Yeah.
The kids who ask us, the young adults who at camp ask us, hey, what can I do to do my job better? That's the $1 million question. Because when someone actually seeks that kind of feedback, you're just oh my gosh, let me think about that. That's such a great question. And, here's somewhere that I've noticed something. And so that's one step further. But yeah, that feedback thing, I think it's hard for everybody to feel getting any kind of constructive feedback. But you're so right that at that age, of course, you're going to not do everything right in a new job.
Well, and I also think that the difference between school, and maybe this is throwing Andy under the bus a little bit, but
yes, please do.
In college, I think it's easy to kind of float through the semester until midterms, and then cram, cram, cram. You have your midterm, great, I got an A. Float until finals, and then do it again. And that's the formula that people find great success with. I mean,
I would not call my collegiate GPA great success, but it was sufficient success.
Well, and I think that's okay, but I think at camp the focus really, we don't have a midterm, we don't have a final exam, and the eval, the chance that we have to meet with counselors and talk to them about how they're doing is absolutely not a grade. It's touching base with them about, here are all the great things you're doing. Here's how you can grow those great skills. And here are the things I really want you to focus on before we talk again.
We took the numbers away.
Yep.
There was a time where we had a 4.3210 eval, and now it's please continue doing, please work on. Because those things are much less kind of grade driven. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, and similarly, you don't have an opportunity to kind of slide through a session and do a great job on the last day. The work at camp, you have to be on all the time. And that can sound daunting, but it's also really great because you have so many opportunities to get it right. So when you do something that maybe wasn't your best, or, you're just having a little bit of an off morning, wish you stayed in bed a little longer, it's okay because tomorrow's coming and you have another chance to do it really quickly after, and you'll learn from any mistake that you make. And I think that we're pretty forgiving on mistakes for people who are willing to make those improvements for sure.
But I would say any job this translates that coachability thing.
Oh, 100%.
Any job that you're in. And regardless of, I'm sure there are a lot of businesses where their feedback system is score-based or has that element too. Still, to receive that coaching or whatever feedback you do get or ask for it, I think is a really good trait to have in any job that you're doing in this.
100%. We work with a guy named Bill Werlin at camp who has worked for the North Face and a bunch of other big Fortune 500 companies. And the sign he hung up in the window of the store when he was there supervising was like 10 things you don't need any talent to do. And like number 1 was be on time, and number 2 was take feedback. Like that's a guy who has been in the corporate world, and he's like, yeah, what you need to do is show up on time. And when people have corrections, act on those. So
yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So coachability, what else do you have as advice for these young adults to really stand out and be successful in jobs?
I think it really boils down to a person's capacity to tolerate discomfort. And that's something that we really try to feel out in the interview process and talk about difficult experiences in their lives, or when they've confronted a friend, or how do you talk to people if you have different viewpoints. That's a really important skill at camp because, again, we do live together and work together. So it's a much more in-your-face environment. You don't get to go home and kind of check out at the end of the day and say, oh, I couldn't handle working with this person. You have to figure out a way through. And I think being able to tolerate discomfort, and that comes in so many forms at camp that I think are fairly unique to working at camp, but I think prepare anyone to work for anyone in any job. I think at camp we have some unique physical challenges in terms of weather. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's less. Sometimes it's beautiful and warm, and sometimes we need a few extra layers. And sometimes it changes within a day. And so that flexibility that we're learning, again, that's just practicing discomfort, and we're all in it together. It's not like some people get to hide in a building and everybody else has to be out there. No, our entire job is out there doing what we do. And those kids are only at camp for the time that they're at camp. So when it rains, we keep going as much as we can. And I think that kind of thing is great, the physical discomfort. And then I think also just being with people who have different life experiences, different personalities, really vastly different viewpoints on issues. I mean, you can talk about politics, religion, all of kind of those things that you don't want to talk about at a dinner table. We want to make a safe place where you learn how to, it doesn't need to be an argument. It can be, we can coexist and respect each other and have different viewpoints on something. And I think that's a really important thing to learn earlier versus later. And I think camp really confronts you with the need to do that right away.
Well, and I think as we talk about, like, what are you looking for in a 20-year-old? I'm looking for someone who can be uncomfortable without it disrupting everything. Current people in that 20s have plenty of experience. They, at a fairly formative time, be it career or school-wise, were in a global pandemic when everything shifted. And I think they are fairly flexible. I think you're looking, like, if you want to be successful across the board, applying that flexibility, which we all had to do because we have a choice. But if you can hang on to that flexibility, that's going to be really important.
One of the things that we teach most at camp for campers is independence. You know, they're often experiencing being away from home for the first time. And many of our counselors are experiencing that to a greater degree than they have even at college because they don't have access to quickly text mom to ask what their social security number is or anything along those lines. But I think it's so natural as parents. We always want to protect our kids. Like, you don't want to pave the way for them and not have them experience discomfort. No, I think natural consequences are great. But when you get to be in an environment where you have no choice other than to rely on yourself and the people that you physically see around you, I think that really accelerates your growth and your independence. And we hear that from camper families, but we also hear that from counselors. As they leave camp, they feel bolder and more willing to take on challenges that could have been scary because of isolation or whatever it takes.
Yeah, the number of times we hear in an exit interview from a counselor, I can do so much more than I thought I could do, I think is really invaluable. And I think it goes back to, Alison's talking about discomfort. So many people don't want to be uncomfortable. And I don't blame them. Being uncomfortable is awful. But when it prevents us from doing things that might be rewarding, that's when it's a problem. And, it's interesting. One of the things we did this offseason in response to people talking about generational differences, we shortened the application. We made it much quicker to apply with us. You no longer had to answer essay questions. And a lot more people are applying. And is that because it's discomfort or is it because that was a barrier? I don't know, but it's an interesting data point that probably doesn't apply to this conversation at all. So
that's okay. Well, but I think you bring up a good point that life, unfortunately, is uncomfortable a lot. And especially anytime you're doing anything new, it is super uncomfortable to go to a new school, to go to a new job, to go to anything new where you don't know people. And I do think that is challenging for young adults, for some young adults especially. And so that's something that you definitely want to overcome, whether it's on a small scale, you know what I mean? Like start small, like whatever it is. If you've never been out of your town or your friend group, great practice during these years to expand your social circles and get a little uncomfortable by putting yourselves in environments where you have the chance to grow some ideas and skills. Also, I think the getting uncomfortable and outside of your comfort zone relates to gaining skills, right, in the workplace.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that we can provide people with a lot of skills, especially Andy mentioned leadership. And we teach people from the beginning, from day one, you are a leader at camp. All of these campers are looking up to you. So I think that really, our staff, I'm always impressed. They really take it inside and understand the gravity of their responsibility and their influence on the campers. And so they present themselves in a way that is agreeable to what campers need. And they're able to adjust that. I think it's really easy to fall into, I'm going to interact with my peers on a way that I do when I'm sitting on a couch in my dorm room. And this job really forces people to think about, how does this look from the outside? And I think that's, again, a skill that I would rather everyone learn earlier versus later. And I think that that's a really helpful just skill to start learning is what you need to be considered a leader. Because we want everyone to go out and be leaders in whatever position they're in. You don't need a title to be a leader. We tell them that all the time. You can be a leader from anywhere in an organization. So hopefully when they start their careers down the line, maybe in their 30s, when they're deciding that they're ready to be done with us, then they can actually step in knowing what it feels like to be a leader, so that even if you're starting at the bottom, you're still valued for what you are bringing to the table.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so know that discomfort is going to be part of all stages of life, but maybe especially so during this time because there's so much new stuff happening, new jobs, new places to live, new relationships. Everything is going to be, so there's going to be some discomfort. And so you're looking for people who can kind of push through that, can say, oh, wow, I'm a little uncomfortable here. Last summer, I really liked when we had a really authentic discussion about with some returning staff, young adults who had considered quitting early the summer before, and they shared their stories. And it really was speaking to they were feeling overwhelmed, uncomfortable. I think their self-talk was, I don't think I can do this. And so what was remarkable about that was kind of the end, what they all came out with at the end is like, wow, if I hadn't stayed and pushed through that discomfort, I wouldn't have learned all these things, met these people, had this great experience. And obviously it was enough to bring them back another year. So I think that ability to dig deep is kind of an important thing to grasp. And one thing that we talk about, and I think if you are a young adult and you're in a job, any job, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I hate this job, I'm really uncomfortable. If you are thinking about leaving, take a few breaths and do some contemplation before that. Ideally, I would suggest have something else lined up, an idea of something else that you want to do, but also don't make big decisions when you're at the low point of you're kind of at your wit's end. Seek some guidance and counsel from wise people. Also, do some contemplation on maybe the culture at the place is not what you want, but what are some skills that you're learning? What is it, do you have one friend there that you like? Kind of focus on the idea that you're probably never going to find a perfect workplace ever in your whole life. And maybe you've decided that wherever you are right now isn't the place you want to be. And that's good to know about yourself. And while you're figuring out your next move, think about what you are learning and the skills you are gaining. Because even if it's just an observation about culture, which I have talked to some young adults who have worked at places that have some pretty toxic things going on from supervisors and that kind of thing. And obviously you don't want to stay there forever in a place like that. But for future leaders, what are you learning in that situation that when you get to a point where you're going to be the person creating the culture for your team or your group, how are you going to behave differently because of what you've experienced? And that too, that's all part of your learning experience, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the things we talk about with staff who are maybe on the cusp of an early departure set is one of the phrases I like is don't make any decisions after dark.
Oh,
like when you're tired.
Oh yeah.
And for us, that's a little different. We're a resident camp. People live with us. They're coming to talk to you at 9 at night. It's like, well, sleep for 10 hours and see how you feel. But even like I've worked jobs that weren't great. And the same kind of thing. Don't make a decision about that job while you're in the lowest of lows, in the dark. Think about, okay, what's going on here? And then the other thing, and this goes back to people in their 20s, I think you should talk with your supervisor about what's making the job miserable. Like if it's a culture thing and it's your supervisor's the problem, it's a hard conversation. It's not going to be comfortable. And also you owe it to yourself to say, hey, these are some things that you're doing as far as how I get feedback or how you're giving me assignments or I don't like the way that feels. And maybe they say, well, that's how it is here. And that's your great sign in the light to say, then this isn't the place for me. And maybe they just deliver feedback or assignments in a way that they received them when they were young and they think, well, that's how it's done. And that goes back to, I think Alison was talking about communication, like being able to communicate clearly and without a ton of emotion. Like this isn't anybody's fault. It's just like feedback. Like I'm giving you some feedback as my supervisor. This is how I would prefer to receive this feedback, this evaluation.
Andy mentioned that we have kind of end of summer chats with all of our staff before we bring them back. And I'm always struck by how many people say they came to have fun and do this job. It sounded like a great thing. And they had no idea how much they would gain from the experience. And that's talking about skills, interests, friendships, interactions with campers. And I think that camp really just provides that opportunity. You can make a lot more money and you can work much less.
Oh, yeah.
Both of those things can be true at so many other places. Camp is for people who are dedicated to self-improvement, to leadership, to building their own skills, and to working with kids and giving kids an amazing summer experience. And I think just the mentality that gives us for that summer and knowing that it's a short season and we just give it our all every single day, it's really empowering and encouraging. And I think that the staff really find that the teamwork aspect is just always present. We are all pulling in one direction for the same goal every single day. And camp isn't a place where people stand out for being great at studying or great personal achievers. It doesn't matter what you can do on your own. You have to lead your campers through it, or you have to lead your team through it. And so there really aren't standout people. It's all of us having to come together. You're always relying on someone else. Save for being in the bathroom or the shower, those are the only times you're ever alone at camp. And I think that's really a neat experience to go through.
Okay. Any other advice, maybe last words when you think about you're advising your cousin who's, this is not about camp. This is just about life. They're going out into the job world. What are some things that you would say, hey, when you get there to this new job or to this interview or wherever you're going, here's just my words of wisdom for you as you kind of kick off in your kind of young adulthood, job search, job world life?
I will pass on the advice that I got when I was 22 going to student teach for the first time. And my student teaching advisor said, when you show up to the school on the first day and you're the fish out of water, it is like Lord of the Flies, and you have to figure out who is who, and don't be Piggy, right? Because Piggy in the Lord of the Flies puts himself very forward, makes this big presentation about who he is, and it ends very poorly for him because that's not who he really is. And so the message was, read the room, figure out who you are. Don't walk into the room thinking, I am God's gift to fill in the blank career because I have a degree. I just got out of a big name school. Like, the reality is, after you get past HR and onboarding, people in that office probably don't care where you went to school. They care about, are you pleasant to work with? Are you a good collaborator? Do you do what you say you will do? That's what people care about. It's like you said, like, we have sent counselors to jobs at very giant name engineering places who had no internships. Like, all of their experience was at camp with us. That was their entire employment. And those places know that everybody who has the degree has the skills. They're looking for people who can work with each other. And you have to find a way to work with each other. The modern world doesn't have a place for solos anymore. This is all collaborative. So be a good collaborator. I boiled it down.
That's good. You kind of started on mine. So my last piece of advice really is, again, not to get stuck with what you think you are or what you think you like, yes, or viewing college as being a vocational experience. I think it's completely unfair. I mean, we can have a whole podcast on the education system, but I think it's unfair that we ask 18-year-old kids or 17-year-old kids, for that matter, to be deciding what they want to do for the rest of their lives when they apply to college. And I think the tendency is, I've just spent all these years getting this degree for this very specific kind of field. And I think not having the fear, not being paralyzed by fear of just continuing to explore. And I think even though now I'm in my 40s, I feel like that's the thing that really is important throughout life, and especially early on. If you decide early on, this is what I was supposed to be doing and I have to stick with it, even if it's uncomfortable, I get it. Great. We don't want extended discomfort, but find the ways to branch out. And I think that that's a really nice way to go. You don't have to stop learning, always be learning. And if it takes you in a completely different direction, good. That's something to celebrate. I think there's too much in the culture of getting behind. And I think that's often we hear from counselors who feel that they need to get an internship instead of returning to camp, that they feel like they're behind their peers because last summer they didn't get an internship. And then we get to have a conversation with them about how behind is not, like, you're the one deciding that you're behind. Let's talk about the skills that you developed and let's actually put you on the map.
Let's put those on a resume.
Yeah.
Let's make counseling look good on a resume. It's easy to do.
So I think just flexibility in terms of your self-concept and your capacity to learn new skills every single day.
Okay, Alison and Andy, this has been terrific. I feel like we could go on and on with many different side topics, yes, but I think in general, there's just some really good input. And I think that this is something that usually no one's really telling young adults as they go out there, that you'll usually, like you were talking about grades and stuff, when you're interviewing a young adult, You're looking for the soft skills, the relational skills.
We don't even ask for a transcript.
Right.
Don't ask for a resume.
Yeah.
Don't care.
And even like you said, even in jobs that are skill related, you really want people that you want to work with. Mm-hmm. So I think all of the relational skills that you work on in any capacity, in any job, is super important for your kind of long-term career success. So anyway, thanks so much for being on today. We'll do it again sometime.
Great. Look forward to it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. As always, you can find notes and links in the show notes and at sunshine-parenting.com. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate you either sharing it with a friend or giving Sunshine Parenting a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I also invite you to read or listen to my book, Happy Campers: 9 Summer Camp Secrets for Raising Kids Who Become Thriving Adults. It's provided encouragement and simple strategies for building character traits and social skills to more than 3,000 readers so far. Happy Campers is available as an audiobook and in print or digital wherever you buy your books. Here's to raising and being thriving adults.